My name is Michael Staleyn. I've been interested in the occult for as long as I can remember and went through a lot of different phases of interest. In the mid to late 1960s, I became very interested in Aleister Crowley. However, in the mid 1970s, I came across Kenneth Grant's work, which I found very inspirational. And I actually met Kenneth Grant at that time, and later became a member of the Tyfonisen O.T.O. I actually became what you might call Kenneth's right-hand man in the early 1980s, and helped run the Order for him, and basically helped him out in all sorts of ways. And then eventually, in the mid-1990s, I became his publisher. And in fact, Against the Light was the first work by Kenneth Grant that Starfire Publishing published, apart from the magazine Starfire. And then sort of as the 90s and 2000s wore on, I published more and more of Kenneth Grant's books. I published the last two volumes in the Tyfonisian trilogies, and then subsequently, after the Ninth Arch, we published various novels by Kenneth. We published the collected articles known as Against the Light. And then before Kenneth died, we actually published second editions, started publishing second editions of his work. We did Outside the Circles of Time in 2008 and The Magic Revival in 2010. Then after Kenneth died, I worked across a number of years producing second editions of the rest of the Tyfonisian trilogies with Steffi Grant. And that's more or less where we are today. In the early 2020s, I started reprinting in paperback as well as hardback format the Tyfonisian trilogies, which has been very successful, and which has introduced Kenneth's work to a lot of new people. And so that's basically where I am today. From a very early age, the 1930s, I suspect, but plenty of early material remains from the early 1940s. From a very early age, he was writing poetry and fiction, and quite a few of these items that one might call juvenalia still exist. I mean, for instance, the novel The Other Child, which was finally published in 2003, he first started writing that in 1948. So he was writing an awful lot, and I don't really think there was a reason behind it. I think that it was just the urge to create that he clearly felt from a very early age. Years later, in the Carfax monograph entitled Hidden Law, he actually set out the conviction that fiction could convey occult knowledge in a form that would bypass the rational mind and be recognized as truth intuitively at a level deeper than rationality. Kenneth, as you might expect, expressed this a lot more succinctly and a lot more expansively than I did. And I'd like to read out a very late paragraph from Hidden Law, which illustrates this. Being disguised as fiction, little resistance is offered by the mind, and the psychic censor is thus bypassed. These facts, or fictions, call them what we will, are accepted at their true value by the subconsciousness, because at that level exists the storehouse of racial and atavistic experience, which knows the truth of these matters and needs only a hint to bring them up once more into the active arena of consciousness. I think that sums up the purpose of writing fiction and the impact that it can actually have on other people. I think that sums it up very well. There's no direct evidence that I've come across that would actually say when. However, again, I think he took an interest in these writers, such as that you've mentioned there, in the late 30s or early 40s. And I can say that in the extensive library that Kenneth left behind at his death, and there are some books there that one can tell from inscriptions on the flyleaf, etc., that they're very early, late 30s, early 40s. The writers such as those are actually well represented. Now, besides the authors that you've mentioned there, Lovecraft, Blackwood, Machen, and Crowley, again, in the Carfax monograph Hidden Law, Kenneth actually mentions quite a large number of lesser known writers that he considers wrote occult fiction that conveyed fact, at a deeper level. And I can just reel off some of those, such as Hugh Walpole, Brodie Innes, Charles Williams, Mary Bly Bond, and Maurice Hewlett. Now, what Grant's doing with, shall we say, the more well-known writers such as Lovecraft, Blackwood, and Machen, he is, well, all of these writers have got different styles. They've got different angles that they're writing about, but Kenneth mentions them because reading them seeds consciousness. Reading them doesn't just give you huge ideas. I mean, for instance, I started reading Lovecraft in the mid to late 1960s, whilst I was on long coach journeys that would go from Bedford, where I lived, up to the north of England, where I was going to be staying for my summer holidays. And at that time, I hadn't come across Kenneth Grant and his ideas, but I found Lovecraft stories inspirational because reading them, you could actually feel the expansive effect upon imagination. You could feel sometimes the concepts, you could feel your mind reeling, as it were. And that is a huge thing, I think, about occult fiction. Yes, the idea that it bypasses the censor, that it bypasses rationality, and it's accepted at a deeper level. But conversely, even consciously, it just inspires you to think about things that you've never thought before, and that indeed make a huge difference to you. Number one for Kenneth was Arthur Machen. Arthur Machen was his favourite author. Indeed, at the time, in 1945, that he was in 1944 when he was first corresponding with Aleister Crowley. He lent Crowley a copy of a book by Machen, the title of which escapes me at the moment, and it turned out that they both shared a love for Machen. And Machen, although Lovecraft is referenced far more frequently throughout the Typhonian trilogies, Machen, in my view, is definitely the more important author. He was undoubtedly Kenneth's favourite author. You know, he had more ideas. He was the more mystical of the two. I mean, Lovecraft had some fantastic ideas, but Lovecraft always remained a rationalist. You know, whereas Machen was a true mystic. That certainly comes across in his writings. Well, as can be seen in the end papers that you've actually reproduced in Against the Light, Kenneth started writing the book in June 1985, and there's quite a lot of elements to Against the Light, but there's some in particular that actually tell us where it actually sprang from. In the first place, the family name on Kenneth's mother's side was Wyard, and the family seemed to have come across with the Huguenots several centuries ago, and they settled at a village called Brundish in the county of Suffolk, which is on the eastern side of England. In the early 1980s, Kenneth came across a book called The Dark World of Witches by Eric Maple. This book had been published in 1962. And what this book was, it was a brief account of witchcraft trials in England, witchcraft trials and executions in the 16th and the 17th centuries. And Kenneth was quite startled whilst reading this book to come across an account of a woman called Margaret Wyard, who was interrogated, judged to be a witch, and executed. Now, Margaret Wyard lived in a small town called Framlingham, which actually is very close to Brundish. So given the proximity to Brundish, given the fact that it was the same family name, then almost certainly she would have been a relative. And so Kenneth was quite startled by this because he wasn't aware. He'd never been aware of this. It was hardly a family tradition that he'd heard of. And so it basically inspired him to start writing a novel, because he found it quite inspirational that there was an ancestor of his that had been a witch. And there were several other elements. There was another major element woven into this story, which is that in late 1980, in Rendlesham Forest, which again is in Suffolk and not that far away from both Framlingham and Brundish, there were strange unexplained lights seen, which came to be regarded as UFO experiences. So because this was in Rendlesham, which was very close to where this woman, Margaret Wyard, had been born, had lived, and had died, it was woven into the story. Now, unfortunately, there would have been several typescript drafts of Against the Light, and if they had survived, then we would have been able to trace the development of Against the Light, because as you know, when people start writing something, it often changes from the original conception as they're writing, or say different angles become obvious and are actually woven. Sometimes, you know, things can take on a different angle. So what we don't know is that Against the Light, as it was published, as the last typescript was, which Kenneth passed to me in 1995, we don't know whether the existence of several themes from Okbish were actually there at the beginning. I suspect not. I suspect that as the novel progressed through successive versions, successive edits, more and more emerged, that more and more elements emerged from Okbish. That's my suspicion, but unfortunately, I'm never going to know. It kind of did make you wonder how much in Against the Light is actually fiction and not fact. But again, that's something that you'll never know. I mean, I know that a lot of people tend to sort of regard Against the Light as being thinly disguised autobiographical elements in Kenneth's life, but you're on treacherous ground, because it is actually fiction, and so you can't be sure to what extent, you know, he's actually using facts and sort of to what extent he's embroidering. And it is a very, very interesting question, but the answer to that is no, he didn't. Again, in that Carfax monograph, Hidden Law, he kind of cites quite a few writers, and of course, all of those writers will have their unique styles, their different styles of writing. But to my knowledge, he never commented. That's neither to me, nor have I come across a comment by him in writing. He never commented upon the idea of using different approaches. It's a very, very interesting idea, but it's not one that he explored. The nearest that he came to that, in my view, was the idea that people could write in certain ways. They could actually write in certain ways that would trigger off an experience in the writer, in the reader. That is actually fascinating, and he actually expressed that in the final 3 paragraphs of the introduction to Outside the Circles of Time. One final point is here relevant, and I state it without apology. It is not my purpose to try and prove anything. My aim is to construct a magical mirror capable of reflecting some of the less elusive images seen as shadows of a future eon. This I do by means of suggestion, evocation, and by those oblique and in-betweenness concepts that Austin Spare defined as neither. When this is understood, the reader's mind becomes receptive to the influx of certain concepts that can, if received undistortedly, fertilize the unknown dimensions of his consciousness. In order to achieve this aim, a new manner of communication has to be evolved. Language itself has to be reborn, revivified, and given a new direction and a new momentum. The truly creative image is born of creative imagining, and this, ultimately, is an irrational process that transcends the grasp of human logic. It is well known that scientists and mathematicians have evolved a cryptic language, a language so elusive, so fugitive, and yet so essentially cosmic that it forms an almost Kabbalistic mode of communication, often misinterpreted by its own initiates. Our position is not quite as desperate, for we are dealing primarily with the body-mind complex in its relation to the universe, and the body-mind aspect is deeply rooted in the soil of sentiency. Our minds may not understand, but in the deeper layers of the subconsciousness, where humanity shares a common bed, there is instant recognition. Similarly, a magician devises his ceremony in harmony with the forces he wills to invoke. So an author must pay considerable attention to the creation of an atmosphere that is suitable for his operations. Words are his magical instruments, and their vibration must produce not a merely arbitrary noise, but an elaborate symphony of tonal reverberations which trigger a series of increasingly profound echoes in the consciousness of his readers. One cannot overemphasize or overestimate the importance of this subtle form of alchemy, for it is in the nuances and not necessarily in the rational meanings of the words and numbers employed that the magic resides. Furthermore, it is very often in the suggestion of certain words not used, yet indicated or implied by other words having no direct relation to them, that produce the most precise definitions. The edifice of a reality construct may sometimes be reared only by an architecture of absence, whereby the real building is at one and the same time revealed and concealed by an alien structure haunted by probabilities. These are legion, and it is the creative faculty of the reader, awake and active, that can people the house with souls. So then, this book may mean many things to many readers and different things to all, but to none can it mean nothing at all, for the house is constructed in such a manner that no echo may be lost. That for me is the most amazing passage that Kenneth Grant ever wrote, and I find it very, very inspirational. I remember coming across it in 1980 when the book was first published, and I could barely understand it, but over the years I understand it more and more. It's an amazingly profound concept expressed in a very, very beautiful manner. In my opinion, quite simply, Grant's work over the decades, and not only during the 30 years that the Typhonian trilogies were published, but also the earlier unpublished work, the hinterland out of which the trilogies emerged. In my opinion, the whole thing can be seen as the pursuit of wholeness, and that pursuit of wholeness isn't just on an individual level, but it actually transcends individual level into what you might call a cosmic level of consciousness, which is kind of suggested by Advaita Vedānta, which sees the whole universe as a continuum of consciousness, and we are transient parts of that continuum, which of course, you know, we're born, we flourish, we perish, and we kind of sort of rejoin the continuum, no doubt to emerge in some other form at some other place. But I think that in this process of development over those years, then yes, it does become more subjective. And I think sort of you can go back to Against the Light here. I mean, for instance, in Against the Light, the child's colouring book, which his mother throws in the dustbin at the very end of the novel, and which can be seen, if you like, as being consigned to the cliff off, as it were. That colouring book emerges, you know, sort of decades later as the grimoire in the Grant family. And it's interesting. So in order to understand more and more, you are drawn to look at these earlier experiences. I mean, some people argue that when you're younger, you're more open you're more aware, you're more open to experiences, and then as you grow older, somehow your mind becomes more rigid, more constrained. I've come across that. I mean, it's not true, to be honest. In my experience, I think that if you're interested in magic and mysticism, in occult experience, and even more so if you're obsessed with it and you do practical work, then consciousness and awareness become much more open